I had this supervisor, Kate. One day, we had a discussion that turned into the unexplained, and she told me about something that happened when she was a teenager. She tries to debunk crazy things that have happened, but this is one she hasn't been able to do. It was the summer after she graduated from high school, sometime in the second half of the 1990s. She was 18 at the time. Her friend Billy was a few years older, but still lived with his mother. This was in a small town in western Maryland, and Billy's house had just enough land that he could throw raging, day-to-night summer parties complete with bonfires. At the same time, they weren't totally isolated, and random people from the surrounding neighborhoods would show up at his parties all the time. One day, Billy met this skater kid named Nick at one park one morning, and being a social animal guy, Billy invited him to hang out with him at his house. Billy probably also took some pity on Nick, because Nick told him he was a runaway who was living at the park. They would basically play video games, go on rides, and party till late at night. Nick started showing up every day at Billy's house, knocking on the door at 7 a.m. sharp and engaging him in the morning until midnight, drinking. He was about 16, with dark eyes and dark spiky hair. Remember, this was the late 90s. He seemed fairly normal, and everything except for a couple of things, that is. The first was that he was always wearing the same thing: a plain t-shirt and a pair of camo print cargo shorts. Despite the fact that he was sleeping at a park, his clothes always looked clean. The second is that he was never seen eating or going to the bathroom, despite the fact that Nick was drinking heavily with Billy. Finally, oddly enough, no one remembers actually feeling Nick's skin. Even my supervisor, who had sat next to him in a car during a road trip. She hung out with Billy and Nick at Billy's house 2 times, and each time, she and her friend felt like something was very off with Nick, especially when he would give off this laugh that just sounded very evil and maniacal. He also seemed to get kookier and weirder when they went on a road trip and the further they got away from Billy's city. Nick would also never shut up about his father's gun collection. Finally, Billy's hospitality reached its limits. After 2 weeks of waking Billy up at 7 a.m. to go party, Billy snapped at Nick. He said, "Look, Nick, you've been coming here every morning for 2 weeks. You're waking up my mother, who's trying to sleep. You really need to go now. Please just come back later." Then he slammed the door shut, and Nick never showed up again. Billy came to Katie a little bit later with a newspaper article. It was about Nick, who had apparently killed himself. Nick had escaped the mental asylum his parents had put him in that was located in Billy's town. He got to his father's house and shot himself with his father's gun. Billy was originally upset because he felt he must have put Nick over the edge when he kicked him out, until he checked the dates. Nick had committed suicide on July 10th, 2 weeks before they had even met.
I'm 27 years old, male, live in the UK with my fiancée, and currently working as a teaching assistant for teenagers with special educational needs in a school not far from Bradgate Park. I have worked in a number of schools and children's homes now, and these buildings, especially the children's homes, are usually old, renovated houses or halls. This particular story happened in 2013, when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teens and young adults, 18 to 30 years old, with autism, brain damage, and challenging behavior. The house that I worked in was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a game room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden with a summer house and activity room that led on to acres of fields and woodland. I had been working there for about 3 weeks, and primarily worked the waking night shift. This shift ran from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m., and it was my duty to make sure all of the residents were settled for the night and to get the cleaning done before the day staff came in to take over. I would usually get all of my jobs done for around 1 a.m. and spend the rest of the night listening out for anyone that woke up. I would watch TV, read my university course books, or sometimes just play games on my phone once I was finished. The residents usually slept all night. On one particular night, a young man named James was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he did have a lot of strength behind him when he got into one of his bad moods, and the slightest thing could set him off. He once threw a member of staff through a patio door because she had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form full sentences and would communicate with fairly simple words put together in a way that he understood. For example, he would say something like, "James, make breakfast," when he was ready to make breakfast, or "James, go outside," if he wanted to go outside and play. He was generally well behaved and could be quite funny when he wanted to be, but was well known for his temper. At around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself, and he went back upstairs without any real bother. I sat on top of the step and kept an eye on his door for maybe 15 minutes or so to make sure he didn't wake any of the other residents. Once he had settled in, I went back to my cleaning. The room beneath James's bedroom was a communal living room with board games, a TV, sofas, books, stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something heavy drop onto the floor in the room above. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on his door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm and his eyes looked almost half shut, like he had been asleep. I asked if he was okay and he said yes and put his thumbs up. This was something he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out, so I left him to it and told him to be careful, thinking that he had knocked something over. An hour or so passed by. Now I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another bang above me, again like something had been dropped. This time I realized that the room above the kitchen was currently empty. The house was set up to house 5 residents, but there were only currently 4, and the room above me was the spare empty room. I immediately went to check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a while, and as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep. Due to the nature of their conditions and behaviors, each resident has an alarm fitted to their door that is activated at night, so if anyone leaves their room, a small receiver box that the night staff carry around makes a noise and a light blinks for a few seconds to indicate which door had been opened, numbered 1 through 5. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise was not from any of the residents. I got back to my cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and as I entered the hallway, I could tell that something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs, covering his ears and humming loudly, and 3 members of staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to the sitting room, and the house manager gave me a rundown of what had been going on. For the last 4 hours, James had been quite agitated and kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl," when asked what was wrong. This was something we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a movie that stuck in his head and made him repeat this phrase. Once James had settled into bed, the night staff left, and the other member of staff that was sleeping in went up to the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks, and as usual finished around 1 a.m. Soon after this I went upstairs to do a quick check on all of the residents, but as I got onto the first floor landing, I noticed the light had been turned off. There were 2 small corridors leading to the bedrooms on the left and right-hand sides of the staircase. James's room was on the left, and the light switch was just outside his room. I turned the corner to flick the switch, and there, in the darkness, in complete silence, was James. He was stood in the corner, completely naked, with his eyes as wide as he could possibly hold them. I'm a big guy, 6'3", and weigh about 220, but at that moment I was really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James and asked what was going on, and for a while he said nothing at all. Then, as I turned the light back on, he let out an ear-piercing scream and started slapping himself around the face. The sleep-in staff woke up at this point and helped me to calm the situation and get James back into bed before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night, I had 4 days off. My shift pattern was 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on and 4 days off, and I was relieved that this incident had happened just as my time off began. I got back to work the following week and was told that the situation with James, talking about the little girl, had gotten a lot worse. He would spend hours staring out of the window that overlooked the garden, saying, "Little girl, where are you, little girl?" And no one knew where he had heard the phrase. That night around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that the door to room 5, the spare room, had been opened. Now this instantly seemed a little bit weird to me, as because it was being used for storage at the time. I went up to investigate and found James stood in the room in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me enter and was just standing there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched his shoulder and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's go back to bed. It's late." James turned around and started heading back to his room, and for a second I was relieved. But then as I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed out, "Oh no!" and started pummeling the door with both fists. As he did this, the alarm went off to indicate that the front door had been opened. The only people with the key to the front door were myself and the house manager. The door has 4 locks on it, 2 that require a key and 2 that require electronic ID cards. It was now 3:25 a.m. and the manager never came in before 8, so I presumed that there must have been some kind of mistake and continued to defuse the situation with James. He finally calmed down and went back into his room, so I went downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately and started checking every room in the house in case someone had got in. I then checked on each side of the residence to make sure they were still in the house. Everything was fine. The next night everything was calm until around 2 a.m. when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said that someone was tapping on his window. I guess that he must have just been dreaming, as his window was on the 3rd floor and the house was at least 25 feet from the ground. I went back up to his room with him to reassure him and checked his window. Sure enough, it was shut, and the security lock that had prevented it from opening wide enough for someone to fit through was still sealed. As he got back in bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside of his room. He froze for a second and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see who it was, but no one was there. He was clearly scared by this and said, "Is he back?" My blood ran cold and I asked, "Is who back? What do you mean?" Connor looked over my shoulder and then sank down into his bed, pulling the duvet up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was still no one there. "Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that there was no one there, and left his bedside lamp on before leaving the room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was the middle of January, and around -2 outside, but I felt like I had to get out of the house for a while. After about 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. Beneath the cupboard was a locked, secured drawer where all of the sharp knives are kept until needed. The drawer was open slightly. This was, obviously, a major issue, as none of the residents were allowed to access the knife drawer without supervision. I counted the knives and realized that there was one missing. So I woke the sleep-in staff, told her the situation, and we began a search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still hadn't found this missing knife, so decided to just keep our guard up and make sure none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at 5:30 a.m., the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room again. I went up to check it out and found that the door was locked. How could the alarm have been activated by the door opening if the door was still locked? I went inside and turned the light on. To this day, I still have no explanation for what I found, and I often think about this incident. The bed had been pushed from its usual place and was against the wall, and the wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. But the most disturbing part? In the middle of the room there was a children's doll, a gold bracelet, and a missing knife from the kitchen. The doll was an old-styled baby doll. My guess was that it was made in the 50s, from the style of clothes and the overall look of the doll. The bracelet was simple but old-looking. I left everything as it was and reported it to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed that the bracelet belonged to them, and it was taken to a charity shop soon after, along with the doll. After the doll and the bracelet were removed from the house, James seemed to calm down and never mentioned a little girl or stood around in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything that happened, and sometimes think that it was just a combination of strange behavior from a young autistic boy and the fact that the house was old. But on the other hand, a lot of stuff happened that I can't explain logically. My only regret now is that the doll and the bracelet are gone and can't be examined or identified. Maybe it was paranormal, who knows. But now I work day shifts and do not plan on working night shifts again anytime soon.
About a year ago, my husband and I were in our bedroom having a discussion. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but I know I had to do with spirituality, identifying the type of being and its energy, their intent, and how it makes you feel at the very moment. My husband was standing at the sink in our bathroom, and I was standing in the bathroom doorway to his left, with the left side facing a room. Somehow, and I do not recall how, I started talking about possessions, demons, and their names, and for some reason, I googled a list of demon names. I started at the top of the list and began trying to pronounce the name. Luckily, I suck at pronunciation. Even now, it's kinda difficult. As I've tried a few times to say this name, the more successful I became, is when I started to all of a sudden feel an intense energy that consumed the left side of my body, the side that was facing our room. It was as if someone or something ran or flew high speed right up to me, almost in my face. I felt threatened, as if it were daring me, as if it were saying, "Say it, bitch." My left arm felt as if someone was not necessarily grabbing it in one spot, but was so close that my whole arm felt tight and tingly, and slightly numb. I abruptly stopped trying to say his name, and said, "Oh my God," then was silent and literally terrified. I was so scared that I went into the bedroom with my husband while he was still at the sink, sat on the toilet in fear, and kept peeking around my husband, looking into our room for a good minute with what he described as a look of pure fear and concern on my face. This whole time, the tingling, yet almost electrical numbness did not subside. Once that feeling went away, and I worked up enough courage to leave the bathroom, I jumped on our bed and said a little prayer. Even though I was terrified and confused because I have never experienced such an evil presence like that before. I was curious, I guess you could say. I know, very stupid. Anyone else would have said, "Forget this." Well, stupid me attempted to say the next name on the list, but this time, in my head. Again, a dark, threatening presence filled the room overall, but not as intense and not so close to me or in my personal space, leaving residual energy on my body, but it was enough for me to go. I give up. My husband, not too long after that, came to me and said he mentioned that demonology had been a serious interest of his. He decided to delve deeper into trying to communicate with them, and he said one in particular's name out loud. He explained that saying the name is giving it power. If you say the demon's name out loud, because it is basically inviting it into your life, your world, and even your soul, with the freedom to stalk you and torment you. He recalled the feeling of constantly being stalked and paranoid, witnessing strange occurrences, even among those close to him. He ended up requesting help from members of a deity, and was eventually free from it all. I had never heard of the saying, "Never speak the demon's name out loud," but it makes perfect sense. I owe a lot of what prevented it from happening to the lack of good pronunciation skills, and the feeling that I felt in a short amount of time still creeps me out to this day.
About 12 years ago, I used to live in a dome house. It's one of the only two in our town, and the other is a church. So it's very unique, not just in the architecture, but also in the story of its history. Behind the house I lived in was yet another, bigger dome, one we lived in the apartment contained within. We, meaning my best friend, who was also female like myself, and then her husband. My friend's husband informed me that when they were building the domes, a construction worker fell from the ceiling of the dome, which was around 3 stories up, to the concrete floor below. He obviously didn't survive. Fast forward 20 or so years, and we were living in the apartment just below the area where said workman fell. The feeling of that apartment was always as though someone was watching at all times. Nothing strange happened until we moved into the main house after the larger dome was demolished because of black mold. We moved in and the feeling of being watched continued, but eventually we got used to the feeling, except when it was so strong that it was unavoidable. Now there were many, many incidents of unexplainable things happening. Like my friend getting out of the bath upstairs and feeling like a child wrapped his arms around her neck. Like my friend getting out of the bath upstairs and feeling a child wrap his arms around her naked waist and saying "Mama," or having my tarot cards just materialize from my bedroom upstairs to in front of the back door downstairs, or seeing a cowboy guy standing in the hallway that just disappeared. Also, every night just before falling asleep, in one particular room, I would hear the loud bangs on the wall above my bed that would wake me right up. The most disturbing happening was one night I had gone to sleep in my bed upstairs. Now our stairs were spiral that went up to a landing, and all around the landing were bedroom doors, a door to the aforementioned bathroom and the balcony. This particular night my best friend went to sleep on the couch beneath the balcony. Her husband had been activated in the army and was in Texas before deployment. I was passed out, and I said, in my bed. Maybe a little after midnight, I wake up to her screaming my name. I leapt out of the bed, still in fog of sleepiness. I stopped at the balcony to see what had happened. "Were you just throwing coins at me?" she yells accusingly up at me. "What?" I said. "No, I was passed out." "That's not funny, Sam. Just tell me it was you." Her voice quivered with fear. "No, I told you I was asleep," I said. This made her choke up. I went downstairs immediately. She told me that she was trying to sleep on the couch. Suddenly we heard something metallic hit the wood floor next to the couch she was laying on. A minute or so later, another bounced off of the couch and fell onto the wood floor. Then a coin landed on her. She jumped up and started screaming my name. The proof was on the floor. I saw it with my own eyes. Several pennies peppered the living room floor. After that, we went to bed downstairs in her bedroom. After I moved out, months later, I never forgot that house. Many little things happened in the house, but nothing compared to that experience. It never happened again, and I'm glad that it didn't.
Here are a few details I think you should know. I am a pretty tall and well-built female, so not much scares me. I was 18 at the time this happened, and just the memory of this thing still gives me panic attacks. I was working as a seasonal maintenance worker at one of the parks in the Cherokee National Forest. Often, I would get to work before the rangers and other workers, so that I could take care of the rescue animals. I arrived to work while it was still pitch black outside. I had to open the gate before entering the area where the maintenance building and the animal cages were. I went inside to start my morning routine and prepare the animals' food. I didn't bother to turn on the light, since plenty filtered in through the 2 full-length windows that faced towards the road and the others towards the cages, so there was plenty of light to see by. As I started getting the food ready, I began to get this sense of creepy unease. I took a look outside for whatever was making me feel this way. All I could see was a little old woman with tan skin stumbling drunkenly down the road under the streetlights. People walking these roads weren't that unusual, because there is a camping site down the road. Something was off. This little old lady, or man, or whatever it was, didn't seem quite right. Somehow, my unease kept growing as they came closer. Just as precaution, I locked the front door, which is solid steel, to keep people from stealing equipment. The front gate was open, and the man stumbled through. Keeping the lights off, I ran to the back to make sure the door was locked as well. I sprinted back when I heard the fox and owls making the most distressing sounds I had ever heard. I could see some frantically trying to get out of their cages while others hid. I thought it might be the old man at first, but what I saw crouching between the cages was something completely different. My unease had now turned into full-blown primal fear. Suddenly everything went completely silent. Then a voice that sounded like my boss, but not quite like him, more like someone trying to mimic the way he talked, called out, but I couldn't understand it. The thing began to come forward in a sort of lurch. Its eyes flinched open, and they were sickly green color. It seemed to glow like animals' eyes do when you shine a light on them in the dark. Then it dropped to all fours and started crawling like some demonic creature from a horror movie toward me. It had shaggy, matted fur and a canine-like appearance. But like if you had mixed it with a human, and then hit it with a car, 'cause it was just all so wrong. With a burst of speed, it stood up and slammed into the glass. Its breath fogged up the glass, and it must have stood a good 4 inches from my 5'9" frame. It wasn't huge, but at the time, it looked massive. I was frozen like a deer in the headlights, just staring at this thing. It unhinged its jaw, letting it hang loosely, and the strange voice that sounded a lot like my boss began pleading. "Maggie, open the door! I need your help!" I backed up, feeling for the wrench that was just on the workbench. I was not going to take my eyes off this thing. In all my years of exploring these mountains, I have never seen anything like this creature. And no, I didn't think the wrench was going to do much against this thing. But what else was I supposed to do? It started, frantically saying,
"Let me in! Help me!"
Each time the voice would change. Sometimes it would be my coworker. Other times it would be my family's voices. All I could think was that I just don't know what I could think. I just didn't want this thing to come in here and kill me. I am not a religious person, but at the time I prayed for anyone to help me. I realized there was this foul stench of rotting meat in the air, and I had to fight, not to retch. The creature paced back and forth, clicking its teeth together as it looked frustrated. Without warning, it rounded the corner and started violently yanking at the door and shrieking, "Let me in! Let me in!" It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. I was numb at this point, and all ready to fight for my life. As quickly as it started, it stopped, and the horrible smell began to disappear. I looked out the window in time to see this thing scale the fence and cross the road, disappearing into the forest. Seconds later, my boss came through the little door, and I almost collapsed in relief. Taking the wrench from me and sitting me down, I told him what had happened. I thought he wouldn't believe me, but his wrinkled face just grew stern and concerned, and in a voice that was not to be questioned, he told me to never talk about this creature or it will draw its attention. To never speak of it, and lastly, to never invite it in. If I followed these rules, then I should be fine. He's not sure what drew the creature's attention that morning, but for the rest of my time working there, nothing like this happened again. Sometimes, when I'm on the back trails, I can hear voices or smell that overwhelming stench of death, but hopefully, I never see this thing again.
My husband and I have been married not even a year. We lived in an apartment that was upstairs in the back of the complex. The only thing in the back of us was an empty field, and then some commercial buildings. My husband was in the military, and he had to go out on maneuvers for a month. It was in the middle of the night, sometime after midnight, and I got woken up to a bright light in the hallway, and my cat tearing down the hallway and slamming himself into the glass sliding doors to the balcony, hissing and scratching and clawing. He would then back up to the end of the hall, growling and hissing, and run and slam himself against the doors again. The curtains were drawn, and I could not see anything except this bright, incredible white light. It was lighting up my apartment, almost like a light was on. I didn't dare to go out there, because whatever it was did not make a sound. I kept thinking it was a helicopter. I would have heard the blades or something though, and if there was police down there, I would have definitely seen or heard an engine of some kind. A couple weeks later, I was talking to my neighbor, and she oddly apologized. I told her what happened that night, and she said she was sorry, that she was one of these people that were getting frequently abducted apparently. She had several pregnancies with babies that would just disappear after they were documented inside of her. I have no explanation as to what that was out on my patio, and I had no reason to doubt her, as she had never lied to me before, and I could tell by looking at her face that this was scaring the shit out of her, and she truly did feel sorry, and like she totally actually believed that she was being abducted. She told me not to worry, as they were not coming after me, they were after her. After I moved to North Bay, Ontario, I noticed right away that there was something evil in that house. It started off simple enough with shuffling at night, which at first I thought it was one of our cats, so I didn't really think much of it. It eventually got to the point where we would start hearing our names called out of nowhere, being somewhat used to this from my previous house in Manitoba. Unfortunately, things only escalated from there. It affected me and my dad. We were mostly the ones that were there. We had this cold room in the back of the house that had a walkout into the backyard. No one in the family felt comfortable in that room. My dad was starting to get supper ready one evening, and as he was looking through the freezer, he heard a male voice say, "Ken," from right around the corner in the laundry room. Thinking nothing of it, he said, "What is it, Cam?" And no answer. He came out into the living room, which was downstairs as well. He asked me if I was calling him for something, and I responded no. Side note, I usually call my dad old man or dad. I never use his first name. Later that month, my dad and I were watching a ghost show on YouTube. The host asked, "If there are any demons here, make your presence known." Immediately after the host said that, a bird flew into the glass on the window directly behind us. If that was either something paranormal or maybe just sheer luck. Towards the end of our first year in North Bay, my sister had seen a shadow person peeking out around the corner in the cold room, and it freaked her out. She had the feeling that something was in that house, and it was bad. After New Year's, I was playing on my brand new Xbox 360 in the basement, and directly to my left, my dad's recliner, a deep, guttural growl that lasted for a good 5 seconds emanated from it. Now, this is going to sound like BS, because most people would say fuck it and take off, but I paused my game, looked over directly at the noise and told it, "Is that all you fucking got?" It reached a point where the paranormal activity had reached a daily occurrence. One evening, I was getting ready to go to bed and talking to my brother. I had finished chatting with my brother and was about to head upstairs to bed. As I'm turning the corner, my brother's cat ran out of my cousin's room, turned and hissed into the dark room. She immediately ran up to me and started climbing my leg, so I bent down to pick her up, and I was moving up. I saw a large, black mass rush past me and go up the stairs. So, I immediately talked to my brother about it, when my brother and I both saw an orb, with the lights on, mind you. It shot from the roof and into the floor. It was at this point that I was fed up with the bad vibes getting worse and worse, and performed a cleansing in that house. After that, I never saw anything again, but I'm not sure if it worked for the people who moved in after us. Apparently after 2 years, my parents told me that they sold that house. It was up for sale for a long time, and that's about how long it took for everything to reach the point where I performed the cleansing. I've had my experiences off and on over the years, but it would be a very, very long story. I will share some of my most recent experiences. When I was looking for houses earlier this year, the first I had to look at was an original church from my town in southern Manitoba. I went inside and didn't feel much on the first floor, until I went upstairs and felt a very sad presence in the hall of the upstairs. I left not being able to do much for the spirit as I was only there for a short while. But as I was leaving, I looked up to the second-story window and saw a woman looking down at me from the window. This other house was way worse though. The moment we pulled up onto the property, I just felt weird. While my realtor was opening the shop, I was drawn to the second-floor window and I saw a younger woman looking at me, just like the other house. We went inside the house and was immediately drawn to the basement, a creepy cellar of all places that was low and had terrible lighting. I'm standing down there feeling more and more sick, and I tell my sister that there's something bad in this house. As I made my way through the house, I felt more sick and dizzy, and it was way worse on the second floor. I had to hold onto the wall in order to keep myself from falling over. I eventually had enough and had to walk out of the house and let my sister and the realtor look for the last few things. I felt better after getting out of the house, and when we went to leave to go get some supper, as we were leaving, I looked at the house and I see a complete black hooded figure standing in the window staring at me. I couldn't see anything but the shape of the hood and jet black, but I could feel it staring at me. I told it that it can't follow me or anyone I was in the car with. I haven't sensed it since, and that was almost 3 months ago now. But I hope I don't come into contact with that energy again. Back in 2010, me and my friend went outside in his backyard forest, which is a couple acres at most, probably at close to 1 a.m., to go explore. There's a steep cliff when you first walk in. When we were standing at the cliff before the path, it goes down leading to the rest of the forest. I could see a tall white, illuminated figure, and it was in between two trees, kind of moving around between them. I asked my friend if he saw it, and he said yes, he could as well. And then we stood silent in fear, and I could feel impending doom. The best way I can describe it is that feeling you get when someone dies or you are about to die. That feeling of dread inside your chest like you are helpless. We left very quick because we had no clue what it was, and it scared both of us. I remember my friend yelling something at it, and it was just silently, still, slightly moving between the trees like a slight hover. The figure was pure white and solid, and seemed to be at least 6 to 7 feet tall from where we were standing, which was about 30 to 40 feet away. I am positive it was not a living creature or a human being, and it was not a trick of the mind or light. There was no light nor moon shining in the forest because it was pitch black and filled with pine trees. It had no physical features at all, except for very long arms. It kind of looked like how an ape would have its arms, but they were very long. It was pitch black in the forest, but the whole figure was sort of blurry, giving off a light, like you would look at something out of focus. It wasn't illuminated to the point to where it was giving off light. It was more, whatever the figure was made of light. It didn't have much movement at all, and there was no sound at all. It seemed like it was just kind of pacing right to left or doing something weird between the trees. He has no neighbors that are close to the location, because as I said, his forest is a couple acres, so there is no way it could have been a neighbor in his forest. To this day, the feeling that I got when I saw that still gives me shivers. Something so powerful that it emits a powerful vibe of fear and death. The fact that we went out to this forest at that time really late at night and happened to see that freaks me out as well, because it was clearly meant to be seen by us. If we went to any other location or went out any sooner or later, we might not have ever seen what it was that manifested in the forest at that moment of time.
I want to start this off by saying two things. One, I'm not a great writer and have a hazy memory of all that happened. I was actually asleep when this occurred, but I wasn't at the same time. And two, this account is completely true, but you can believe what you want. I wouldn't believe it had it not happened to me. I was 8 years old at the time, and I had very vivid dreams and nightmares. I later found out that the dreams and nightmares I had weren't just dreams. To this day, I still don't understand why this happened or how. I've heard it called a few different names: astral projection, out-of-body experience, etc. The night in question led me to realize what had been happening years down the road. Keep in mind, this happened 5 years before Insidious came out, and I kind of repressed it up until seeing that movie. It wasn't the same as my encounter, but it was equally terrifying. We were a poor family, just my mother and her 3 children in a 1-bedroom apartment. Her boyfriend was there occasionally too, and I'm really glad he was there that night. My brother, who was 2 to 2.5 at the time, and I shared a bed that was in our dining room. My mom had her bed in her room, and my baby sister had a crib and a walk-in closet. She would have been about 6 months old at this point. There was this stain on the wall that was reminiscent of those paintings that follow your movement with their creepy eyes. I stared at this thing on multiple occasions, wondering what in the heck could have created such a weird stain. I had this creepy feeling when I looked at it. It seemed so familiar to me. I can only describe its appearance as some sort of demonic dragon man hybrid. The creepy red guy in Insidious had nothing on this thing, except they shared a similarity. They both had those creepy yellow eyes. The stain had been there a few months, and I woke up sweating and crying more and more. The night everything happened, however, I was stuck in the corner of my bedroom, very near to my ceiling. I remember looking down at my body beside my screaming brother, who was pointing to the other side of the room. The stain was on the exact other side of the wall from where this thing was. I could see my brother screaming at it and trying to wake me up, and every fiber of my being was trying to wake up, but some force was holding me back. I had this goosebump sensation run up my spine, and I looked over to the other side of the room as my mom and her boyfriend half ran into the room to see what was wrong. My mom's boyfriend was a big dude, and he was prepared to whoop ass if it was an intruder. I saw the creature right as they entered. To this day, I believe it's a demon, and I don't believe it's gone for good. My brother was screaming, "There's a man! He's a snake! He's here to take me and Johnny!" Not my real name, but I prefer not to disclose that. My mom's boyfriend, we'll call him Jack, was a pretty ballsy dude and often bragged about the time that he came back to life after 30-some minutes when his truck was hit by a semi. Him being on the other side for those 30 minutes did something to him, though. Behind that tough guy shell, he was actually more afraid of what was out there in the world than you could even imagine. Jack saw the whatever the heck you can call it in the corner after hearing my brother screaming, and I mean, he actually saw it. And what's more, he turned his head my way, and then he saw me. Not the body in the bed snoring as all hell is going on in the same room. The me in the corner opposite the monster. He hesitated for a minute, and then left to the other room. He came back with what appeared to be a really old book. It wasn't an old Bible, though. It was something different. He started reading words from it aloud and inching towards the demon. The demon seemed to be annoyed by this. At this point, I felt like my life force was somehow being drained, and felt even more restricted by whatever force was holding me in place. Jack turns towards my general direction, almost seeming to look right through me at this point. Like he couldn't see me anymore, and then he said in a reassuring tone, "God is sending us an extra pair of wings." He then slammed the book closed, and from it emanated this bright light. It engulfed the whole room, and I felt like the chains were being ripped away from my astral body. I could see the bright light pushing the monster into the wall, and just like that, it was out of the room. The light continued to grow, and I felt like I was being forced back into my body. And hours later, I woke up. I thought I just had the craziest dream ever, but upon waking up, I saw my mom pacing in the living room, and Jack was cleaning away the stain on the wall. At that point, I felt the presence leave, and didn't have another dream for the next 6 or so years, not even the regular ones. But that was completely fine by me. I verified this story with both my mom and her boyfriend a couple years later, and my mom freaked out that I knew as much as I did. After all, she saw me sitting there sleeping the whole time. She didn't see what was in that other plane with me, but she knew it was there nonetheless. I still have questions, and over the years I have gotten some answers. I did learn the demon's name later on from my little brother. I'm not going to share that, as it's unwise to share demon names, and I haven't been able to dig up any information on the name that I did get from my brother. But I do feel fear every time I think or say that word, so I know somehow my little brother was right. If you have any information that could help me solve this and get some closure, don't hesitate to comment. And if you ever have a run-in with a demon similar to the demon I ran into, call a priest.
I have heard many stories on your channel, and I am glad I am not the only one who has had paranormal experiences. And won't be the last one either. I was a bit hesitant to write my story, but I might as well give it a shot and tell it. I don't want to say my real name, but a lot of people call me Chris. Anyway, I have 2 stories to share. I am 25 years old, and I haven't experienced anything paranormal as an adult, but I can't say that I haven't experienced it in my childhood. The first paranormal experiences were in my home, a place where people should feel safe. The thing is, I don't remember much of it, but my parents do, and one day the conversation came up about the paranormal, and they decided to tell me things about the house that I don't recall or know about. My parents and I used to live in an apartment, but when I turned 3 years old, my parents and I moved into our current house, which was cheap back in the 1990s. It's not in a good or a bad neighborhood, it's kind of just in a rural area. My parents told me that it was a very old house and was not in the best of conditions, but hey, it was home. Before my parents went on any further with the story, they informed me that the house was built in the late 1920s and has a history, but they wouldn't say what. They seemed hesitant. It creeped me out a bit, but I decided not to pry much into it. Something told me it was not a good idea, and I would regret knowing since I lived in the house for almost all my life. My mother told me that before we moved in, I was a cheerful child and always had a smile on my face. But while moving in the house, that all changed. She told me that I used to walk about and talk about death a lot, almost every day, and I would talk to myself most of the time. When she asked me who I was talking to, she said that I would not answer. It was like if I looked hesitant to answer. One day, I was in my own room, while my parents were setting up the living room, when all of a sudden, my 3-year-old self came running into the living room. My face was all red and tears came down like a waterfall, and I was screaming bloody murder, which scared the holy shit out of my parents. I told them, while pointing at my room, "There is an ugly old man in my room." My dad went into the room, and once inside, he saw that no one else was there. My mom told me that it could have been my imagination to try to calm me down. I eventually refused to sleep in my room because of the old man. My dad had enough one day and told me whatever was in my room to please leave me alone, since I was just a child and was scared. Surprisingly, my parents told me that I went back to the room without any complaints. That should be the end, right? Wrong. After being told about my own paranormal experience, my parents told me that some of our family members experienced something paranormal in our home. I had an aunt and uncle who lived with us for 2 years. My aunt told my parents that she had paranormal experiences. My uncle was at work and my aunt was alone in the house cooking lunch. As she was cooking, she said that she couldn't help but feel that she was being watched, but ignored the feeling. However, my aunt told my parents that she heard magnets on the refrigerator moving. My aunt got scared and slowly turned, and what she saw made her scared beyond belief. She saw a little boy standing by the refrigerator. He wore clothing that looked to be from the 1930s. The boy was looking at her for a couple of seconds until he disappeared before her eyes. My aunt and uncle moved out to another state, but my dad told me that my aunt will never forget her experience in our house. First of all, I would like to apologize for any grammar mistakes. I am from Eastern Europe, so English is not my first language. I've been following your channel for some time now, and I would like to share a story. It's not my personal story. This thing happened to a friend of mine. She and her husband were staying overnight at her parents' house. In the countryside. It's a small village, pretty compact, as the houses are close to each other. It's not at all secluded, but still pretty rural. They were staying in some kind of guest bedroom. The windows are facing down the street, so from this room you can hear everything very well, if for example, someone would be walking down the road. It was late at night, past midnight, and they were awoken by a terrible noise outside. Their dog woke up too, but he was too scared to come out from under the bed. He was just hiding there, growling from time to time. They say that they heard many horses running down the street. The commotion was terrible and it went on for a while. They also heard chains as if the horses were dragging them. They were too frightened to get out of bed and look out the window to see what was happening. They felt like they shouldn't see. I know that explanations can be found, but as they described it, something was really wrong with the incident. Nobody there owned any horses. There were no wild horses around, and the creepiest part, no one else heard them, which was pretty impossible since they were extremely loud. They asked the parents the next day and the neighbors, but nobody besides them heard anything. They are religious people, and they were not drinking or consuming anything that could affect their lucidity. I honestly don't think that they would lie about it, or that they would deny any logical explanation for just the sake of being interested or something like that. They were really frightened about that night, and they are not sure what was going on, but they are sure something was wrong. All the loud commotion, the noises the horses were making while running, the chains, they described it all as coming straight from hell. Also, there are legends in the folklore saying that the devil travels around the world with his horses, and sometimes in remote cursed places you can meet him. Who knows? Maybe it was him passing by. Back in the day, a flagman on the railroad would use a lantern with a red bandana wrapped around it to signal danger at night. One night, I was running a coal train to a plant in Louisiana when I noticed a dull red light hovering above the tracks about 1.5 miles ahead of me. Knowing all the railroad history and knowing red means danger, I begin slowing the train so I can stop to see what is wrong. As I get closer, I can begin to make out a pale white man in a dirty sweat-stained shirt with oily overalls on. He's wearing a cap that looks like it dates back to the late 1800s to the early 1900s. As the train slows down, he lifts his lantern, waves his arm free in a slow motion back and forth as signaling me to stop. I keep visual of this man to the point I'm within 100 yards of him. But I'm still moving slightly too fast to stop where he's at, and I know I'll pass him by a few hundred feet. At 50 yards, the man steps to the center of the track and stands there staring at me. I'm now doing all I can, trying to get the train to stop immediately, but it's not a Honda Civic, and it's acting as such. The train moves closer and closer. 40 yards, 30 yards, 20 yards, 10. 5. The man disappears over the nose of the train. My conductor and I are now panicking, thinking we've hit the man. When the train finally stops, the conductor rushes to find the man under the train. What felt like eternity. I'm phoning dispatch, but when my conductor radios,
Jack, there isn't anyone under the train. There isn't even a sign anyone was here.
I ask dispatch if the track is out ahead. He tells me he's checking on that to hold tight. A moment later, and he says,
Yes, an 18-wheeler is hung up on the track. Did you not see a red light at the signal?
I reply,
No, the light must be out.
I radioed my conductor, asking him to look for a signal. He radios me immediately.
Lights out.
I relay the message to dispatch, and he says he will send someone to fix it immediately. In the meantime, just hold tight and he will call when it's clear to run. I tell my conductor what dispatch says, and we both sit in confusion as to what just happened. This man just stopped us from hitting a vehicle, yet he wasn't really there. It was the freakiest thing I've ever experienced. First of all, I want to say sorry for my English. It's not my mother language. Now, to the story. Me, I'm 19 years old, and my younger sister, who's 13 years old, always wanted to try the Ouija board. After we read all the stories and watched the movies, we didn't really believe that someone or something could communicate with us through the board. We tried it a few times, and every time someone tried to talk to us, we made our own Ouija board out of cardboard, tinted our windows, lighted candles, and started a session. We put our hands on the glass, asked if someone was there. The glass was starting to move slowly, and we both looked up at each other and started to ask if one of us did it. We even picked up our hands a few times to make sure it was not us. So, the glass went on the yes. I started asking questions, and it answered. He said that he is a guy, and he's a bad ghost who wants to hurt us. Then the glass moved on the letters and started writing, H-A-H-A. I was surprised and asked if he's making fun of us. He answered yes. Then he started to spell words, I need help. We asked what kind of help he needs. It was creepy and I could feel my hand burning and my sister's fingers were hurting, but we tried to stay calm. He continued to talk. I want to go to Mom. We looked at each other in fear and confusion. I didn't know what to do. I asked if his mom was dead and he answered no. We didn't know if he was making fun of us or if he was lying. Why would he say that he is a bad ghost if he needed help? We decided to end the game, but we wanted to end it and he kept moving the glass to no. We ended it anyway with a weird feeling and headache. Next time, we almost forgot about that. We watched TV, and when suddenly we heard a loud growl, like it came from down the hall. It was scary, and after we checked the house, no one was there. When we got back to our room, we heard it again, but now it was longer and continued with voices. It was so scary, like thousands of people were talking and yelling. After this experience, we burned our Ouija board, and we'll never try it again.
In 1992, I rented a house in Fredericksburg, Virginia, following several years of living abroad. It was a rather pleasant house, a ranch design, in an older neighborhood. There were many large trees that gave shade in the summer, and a wooded area behind the house, along with friendly neighbors and a genuinely placid calm overall. It was a nice place to live. There was not a hint that this house was haunted by an active, though unhappy ghost. As ghost implies, a frightening specter in my mind. I think I prefer the term spirit. The house haunting was confirmed to be human. The haunting did not begin immediately. Months passed, perhaps a year. It began unannounced. There was no warning of any kind, nor even a hint of warning from the landlord. On what I recall as a very lovely late summer day, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our front entry door opened with a bang, and the loud chatter of swinging Venetian blinds. My wife and son were with me in our family room watching television. My daughter was serving in the military and was far off and unexpected. Our heads snapped sharply as we quickly looked at each other's faces, looking for a hint of understanding regarding of what was happening. There was none. Two probabilities came to mind. The first being my daughter home on unexpected leave, with the intent of surprising us. The second was criminal home invasion. After a moment spent gathering my wits, I moved from the family room to the living room. I found our entry door wide open, the blinds which covered its window still swaying side to side. The door, for those prone to detail, opened inward. There was no apparent explanation for what had happened. That door was little used by our family and was kept locked. The door was rather difficult to open, as the door itself was simply stuck in the frame. It took a lot of effort to open, and when the door finally did, it popped free rather heavily as a result of being stuck or jammed, and the force it took to open it, the metal Venetian blinds would swing and sway and clatter. In all, annoying enough that our front door was almost never used. After that first experience, things changed. The front door continued to open, although not frequently. The back door would also be found open from time to time. Bedroom doors opened much more frequently though, and one bedroom in particular. As we were never in fear, and there was no show of hostility, we accepted our new reality. There may also have been an occasional noise during the night, but nothing of real note. We simply adopted whoever this was and often spoke to them with simple greetings or conversation. This came to an end for us in 1998, when it was time to return to my work abroad. Movers came to take away our belongings. While this went on, the lady living next door spoke to me over the fence and asked if anything unusual happened during our stay. I affirmed that it had. Then she told me the following. A woman and her daughter lived in that house in the years past. The girl, a high school student, was 16 or 17 years of age. On New Year's Eve, the girl wanted to attend a party. The mother declined because of severe ice storms. The girl went anyway. The mother waited up to early hours for her daughter to return before crying herself to sleep. The mother was awakened by crying and discovered her daughter sitting in the chair next to her bed. The girl sobbed, "Oh mother, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." The girl repeated her statement and then vanished. After 3 days of searching, the girl's car was located upside down in a canal used by a local power company to produce electricity. The girl's body was in the car, which had slid off the icy road into the frozen canal. The woman who told me this was the sister of the girl's mother, making her the aunt of the girl. They had lived side by side as neighbors as well as relatives. I recall all of this with great clarity. This is a true and accurate presentation of what I had experienced.
Over a decade ago, my best friend told my sister and I a story. We were all in college and she was living at her parents' for a while. They live not too far outside the city, but it's a hilly farmland, so most of the houses are pretty far apart. A family friend lived in a house across the field from them. This is what she told us. Her friend cut across the field the other night to come over. It was a clear night and a bright moon. All of a sudden, a huge shadow flew overhead, completely covering the light from the moon, so he claimed. The shadow flew straight to my best friend's house. Shaken, he continued on and once at the house, told my friend and her family what he had seen. That night, or a couple of nights later, my best friend saw a dark, three-dimensional blob hanging from her ceiling. It was darker than any shadow in the room. It hung down like a half circle or a raindrop. She saw it every night. When a light was on, there was nothing. She spent days moving things around in her room and outside her room, but the shadowy blob remained there. It didn't scare her, but she felt it was watching her. She was just started sleeping with her bedside lamp on to try to help her feel better. My sister and I thought it was a weird story, but, whatever. About 2 years later, I had completely forgotten about my friend's story. I was home alone from college for summer and had to stay in my brother's old room. Things were fine for a week or two, but one night, as I was falling asleep, I saw a three-dimensional blob sticking out from the seam where the wall meets the ceiling. It was darker than any other shadow in the room,
and I had the strangest sensation that it was looking at me. I was very irked, but not afraid. I moved things around inside the room and out over the next few days, but always it was in the same place. I started sleeping with the bedside light on, and I would turn it off for a while to let my eyes adjust to each night to see if it was still there, and it was. Then after about 2 to 3 weeks, when I saw it, I found it had moved up toward me, still along the seam, about 3 feet. After that, I just kept the sort of light on. I was in and out of my room for several years, and I had never had a light off. I finished school and moved here and there, and any time I ever had to stay in that room, there's some kind of light on. I did check again though, and every now and then, over the past 5 odd years, I haven't seen it since. I never saw it in any other room or place that I lived. Final notes. The shadow the friend certainly saw could have been an owl, but he wasn't sure. But who really knows? My friend and I gave a cute name after I remembered her story and I told her I saw the same thing. Again, we got the impression that it was just curious and looking at us, but not up to anything sinister. I'm not a believer in shadow people or creatures, but honestly, I don't know how else to describe this blob.